Hello students! Today is April 15th, which, if you are over 18 years old and have a salary, is a very important day. Today is tax day. You might be wondering, Miss Lim, why are you holding all of those papers over your head? I was asked to make my lessons more visual, so this is a visual representation of what we're talking about today. These are my taxes. Now, thank goodness that COVID-19 happened, so I actually don't need to file these until July 15th now, because I am extremely unorganized. However, if you were to ask my sister, that would be a very different story. Anna?
Yeah.
Have you done your taxes yet?
Yes.
I told you, Anna is way more organized than me, and I don't know why that's fair, because I'm the older sibling and I was supposed to be organized. Anyway, organization is the name of the game for our new unit. In fact, our new unit is called Taxonomy. Taxonomy, it was bad. Anyway, you might wonder, why are we talking about organization right now at this point in biology? Organization follows nicely after evolution because thanks to evolution, from one common ancestor, we have what's now calculated to be approximately 8.7 million different kinds of living organisms on this earth. Some biologists tend to want to focus in and study just one specific kind of living organism. But how can you find that one specific organism that you want to study out of the entire 8.7 million? And what characteristics are going to distinguish that one specific organism from all the other 8.7 million organisms? To do this might be by looking at traits. However, when I start to think about the numerous amounts of traits, it gets a little overwhelming. Think prokaryotic, eukaryotic, cell walls, no cell walls, multicellular, unicellular, the kind of climates they live in. Add in the fact that scientists live all over the world and species live all over the world. So if one scientist in Ghana is calling a certain type of gecko one thing, and then a scientist in North America is calling it something else, that can lead to extra confusion when they then try to combine their research. They don't know if they're talking about two different things or the same thing. Almost as if scientist number one over here was like, this is a boopity bop. And this scientist was like, nah, that's a zippity zip. And he's like, boopity bop, zippity zip, boopity bop. And they're talking about the same thing. Thinking about all this just makes me super overwhelmed. But fortunately for you and me, scientists realized that this was a problem. The idea of organizing or naming species so that everybody knows exactly what type of organism they're talking about. This is our new unit, classification. Before we do that, let's get a good idea of what classification is in biological terms. To do that, we have to turn to a scientist named Carolus Linnaeus. Linnaeus was the first scientist to come up with a universal system of classification for organisms that involved 8 different levels. Linnaeus was the first scientist who came up with the idea of naming species in Latin and also giving them a 2-name system. So that way you would have kind of like a first and a last name to really identify what an organism was. You've probably heard of humans being referred to as Homo sapiens. That's Linnaeus for you. Linnaeus gave us these 2 names, Homo being our genus, sapiens being our species, to identify us as biological organisms. All right, over on page 112, let's title this Biological Classification for our new unit. Heard me using a couple of words kind of interchangeably at this point. One of them would have been classification, and one of them would have been taxonomy, or you get the idea. Let's make sure that we know the difference between the two. So taxonomy is actually the more general term. This is just going to be the scientific naming and organization of objects. In this case for biology, scientific, it's going to be specifically living objects or organisms. Classification, on the other hand, gets slightly more specific, especially when it's related to biology. This is going to be the arrangement of organisms into taxonomic groups, so once again implying that they are organized somehow, based on their physical or genetic characteristics. Carolus Linnaeus was a fascinating guy. He lived in the 18th century, and the method that he came up for organizing organisms today is actually still used almost 200 plus years later. Linnaeus was not only a taxonomist or somebody who organized objects, he used physical structures of different organisms to place them into their groups. The only way that this has changed today is now we have much more specific genes and genetic information, so we can also use genetic information to organize organisms. Finally, he also created a biological naming system that we are still using today. Linnaeus also created what was in his time a 7-level, but has now evolved to being an 8-level system of organization into which all living organisms can be classified. To wrap your head on how immense an 8-level system of organization is, I thought we would start with something that's maybe a little more relatable. You as a student and how you are organized in school. Just for fun, I want you guys to look at these 8 different levels of organization that I have out here. Pause the video and see if you can organize them from largest level, holding the most students, to the smallest level, having one specific student, i.e. you. Go ahead and record this example at the bottom of your notes. You're going to want to leave a little bit of space between Linnaeus and your example.
So there's a couple ways that I could illustrate this. Let's start with the circular method. Let's think on the big term. What is the biggest level of organization that I want to go to right now? Let's talk about the state. After the state, we have our own city district. Within the city, there are many different types of high schools. We've got magnet high schools, we've got large high schools, we've got small schools, we've got all sorts of types of schools. Underneath each school, so if we have magnets versus non-magnets, we've actually got the names of the schools, so the actual high school you're attending. Within that high school, we've got different grade levels. Within those grade levels, we've got different cohorts. Within the cohorts, we have students with certain last names and students with certain first names.
Went along, you probably realize that there's multiple types of schools within the HISD district, from magnet to Title I, big and small. However, within each type of school, different magnet schools, for example, there are many schools themselves. So within magnet schools, we've got Carnegie, HSPVA, and Energy High School. Within Energy, we've got multiple grade levels from 9th all the way up to 12th. Within each grade level, except the seniors, we've got 2 cohorts, so there are 2 cohorts per grade level. In each cohort, there are multiple students with the same last name, but last names can be a distinguishing factor. And finally, within our cohort, if I combine everyone's first name with their last name, all of you are unique. So if I wanted to add in my specifics for me as a person, I might say that my highest level of organization, I am a student in Texas. I am also a student in HISD. Getting more specific, I go to a magnet school in HISD in Texas. The name of my magnet school, even more specific, is EIHS, Energy Institute High School. I am a 9th grade student within Energy Institute High School. I am part of Cohort 2, which is the best cohort. Within Cohort 2, I am one of the students with the last name of Gonzalez. And finally, out of the 3 students with the last name of Gonzalez, I am Sergio, because I rock. Shout out to Sergio. You can see from this example that the school system is extremely organized, going from a very large level, the state district, which encompasses almost 5 million students, all the way down to a single student. And at each level, you get more and more specific, and you gain more and more information about that one student. These various levels of organization give me a lot of information about Sergio, what cohort he's in, what school he goes to, and what state he actually studies in. All these concepts on how to organize a student into different levels all the way up to a state district also apply to Linnaeus's 8 levels of classification. Are you ready? So starting at the top, the biggest one is going to be domain. After domain, we're going to have kingdom.
Dun, 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 dun.
After kingdom, we will have phylum. After phylum comes class. Be classy.
Why, yes, my dear. How classy are we?
After class, we have order.
Order in the car!
After order, we will have family.
Aw, family.
After family, we've got genus. And after genus, we have species. One way I was taught to remember this order was the following. Duh, Katy Perry can only fart good songs. Duh, Katy Perry can only fart good songs. Now, just like over here, each of these levels have certain traits for the organisms that they share in common. For example, let's take a look at a friendly dog. This is a dog. I apologize in advance to all dogs. This is a dog. The dog is in the domain Eukarya because he's a eukaryotic organism. After that, he's in the kingdom Animalia because he is an animal. His phylum is going to be Chordata. Chordata refers to the spinal cord, so these are all organisms that happen to have a backbone. His class is Mammalia, so out of all of the animals who have a backbone, he is a mammal, he is warm-blooded, and he also is going to give birth to live young. After that, his order is Carnivoria, meaning, as you know, he's going to eat meat. So out of all the mammals, he's not an herbivore, he's a carnivore. Furthermore, we then get into dog-specific things. His family is Canidae. I got mixed up with subfamilies here. His genus is going to be Canis. His species is Lupus, which actually refers to wolves as well. And he's got an extra special one. He is a subspecies. So even more specific, he is the species Familiaris, which, as you might recall, looks a little bit like the word familiar, kind of meaning a domesticated dog. You may have noticed that all of these names look quite strange. The reason behind this is all of these names are in Latin. In fact, Linnaeus decided that Latin would be the common language that all scientists around the world use. And thanks to this decision 200 some years ago, we now use Latin whenever we are classifying biological organisms. Last thing for the day. You're going to notice that these last 2 levels, the most specific ones, genus and species, seem quite similar. And it corresponds kind of to our last name and first name. In fact, whenever you want to label an organism or talk about an organism, you should always talk about its genus and species, as if you're calling it by its first and last name.
So if you want to be super extra with your dog, you can call them Canis lupus familiaris.
Calling an organism by its genus and species is going to be something that we call binomial nomenclature. Bi, you probably know by now, means two. Nomial means name. So just like I implied, there will be two names for this organism. In this binomial nomenclature for biological organisms, the genus always comes first, followed by the species. They're always italicized or written at a slant. And finally, you will capitalize the genus while you keep the species lowercase. Take a look at some common Latin names for objects you know. The first one being a carrot. Stradocus carota, also known as a carrot. A cinnamomum verum. Cinnamon actually comes from a tree, and this is the Latin name for that tree. Here we have the lovely Miss Persea americana, the avocado. Fascinatingly enough, in the name you can probably tell that this was kind of the pear of America, or the American pear. Very good. I will show you a rare glimpse of this rare species, the Homo sapiens. Common name Miss Lim, Latin name Lepidus teacherus. So that's all for today, folks. We're just keeping it nice and simple, giving us the general overview of what does classification mean in terms of biology and what is Linnaeus' system for classification. Your practice is on Google Classroom. It is due on Friday at 11:59 p.m. and be on the lookout for another video on the 6 kingdoms coming soon. Remember, students, make it a great day and
make it a great day for someone else.